for this session. VDI is certainly an interesting topic and an area of specialty for Atlantis Computing. So we're happy to be able to present this webinar and provide some insights on how we can do VDI, particularly today persistent VDI, which is the more expensive way often to deliver a virtual desktop, but do it in a very high performance and a very low cost way, which is certainly a new approach. To begin with, just a little bit about Atlantis Computing first. We are headquartered in Silicon Valley with offices in Europe and presence in Asia Pacific as well. We have lots of partnerships globally and over 450 customers with 500,000 licenses sold. So while we may not be a name that you're familiar with, you can rest assured that the technology has been out there in the market and definitely proven itself in some of the most demanding environments. Now, to give further evidence of that, this award-winning software was presented with several very distinguished industry recognitions in 2012. Beyond Storage Magazine's Product of the Year Silver Award, we got the hat trick, or the top 3 awards in desktop virtualization. That was the Best of VMware Award for our ILIO diskless VDI product. That was in 2012, followed in 2012 by our Best of VMware Europe Award. That was for an implementation of that product with Colt, with the desktop as a service environment. And then finally, in 2012, we also won Best of Citrix Synergy for the Atlantis ILIO diskless VDI product. So this is definitely award-winning software that's been deployed in large scale. Now, for a small company, we have some very strategic relationships with some key industry vendors, VMware and Citrix, which you would assume, as well as many of the server and storage platform vendors that are out there today. Atlantis Computing software is the secret sauce behind the largest VDI deployments on the face of the earth. Companies like JPMorgan Chase that have deployed over 100,000 virtual machines or virtual desktops on our software, as well as some very demanding environments such as Military Hospital Network, Walter Reed National Military Center, and Colt, which was mentioned before, which is a very large desktop as a service environment. So whether your environment is a few hundred users on up to 100,000 users, you can be confident that this particular technology has proven itself in an environment very similar to yours. Now, beyond that, with these industry leaders, we have published reference architectures and solutions that are there to guide you as you implement this software. As was mentioned, VMware is one of our partners. We have some documentation on vSAN and a solution there, as well as NetApp on their traditional spinning media, their FAST platform, and their EF flash arrays. With Cisco, we have some great reference architectures and documentation and solutions available for you on their UCS platform. And then also HP 3PAR, IBM flash storage arrays, as well as the PureFlex line, and Dell EqualLogic. So again, for a small company, we have some very key industry partnerships. And again, that's because our technology enables some capabilities and the ability to deliver a desktop environment at an extremely low cost, which is very attractive for these large partners as well. So what is Atlantis ILIO, specifically for persistent VDI? It is a software-only solution. It supports Citrix and VMware VDI as well as Microsoft VDI, and optimizes the way the servers or the way the virtual machines interact with storage. It does so in a way that reduces your overall storage cost. It boosts the performance so that you get like physical PC or better performance, but it also simplifies and de-risks your VDI deployment. And as we move through our presentation today, it'll become more obvious exactly how those cost reductions, those performance optimizations, and eliminating the risk can be leveraged in your environment. When we think about a successful VDI project, there are really three groups or individuals that we have to make happy. One of those is the user community, because without user acceptance, any VDI project is going to fail. Users are looking for things like desktop mobility, bring your own desktop, but regardless of the form factor of their end device, or even the infrastructure you're using to deliver VDI, what's most important to them is that better than PC user experience. Now that can be a challenge. We'll talk about that a bit later. But a better than PC user experience may mean a different thing to a user than it does to an administrator. The admin or the VDI architect may look at a better than PC user experience and compare it to a 75 I/O per second disk in a tower PC that might be refreshed on a user's desktop as part of a desktop refresh. But for many users, they're not comparing VDI performance to that. What they're comparing VDI performance to is every other device they have access to. Maybe it's the MacBook Air that they got over the holidays last year, or an iPad or some other solid-state device. So when we talk about delivering a better than PC user experience, we have to think about that not just from the perspective of the IT administrator, but really from the perspective of the user and what's going to make them happy. Now beyond that, the IT organization is also a critical stakeholder in your VDI project. People don't go down the path of VDI to save money typically. What they go down the path of VDI for is to enable operational benefits and flexibility. And so the IT organization, as they look at a successful VDI project or what it takes to make it successful, they're looking to simplify operations rather than to replace things with new, more cumbersome processes. They're also looking for technologies that are reliable and very easy to manage, breaking down style of business. Also, possibility of disaster. This guy over the CFO, the idea of somebody that's handy, will be covered. We're not delivering on those today. He's that's lower than also for center OpEx cost reductions. Now that's the piece of VDI that is a little more easy to attain, but sometimes the storage infrastructure can skew those results, and we'll talk about that this morning as well. The CFO is also looking to eliminate risk. There can be a lot of hidden costs in VDI, not only hidden costs in implementing it, but even once VDI is in place, down the road there can be hidden costs that creep up. If the environment wasn't sized properly, and then we have to go out and buy more infrastructure to support it, or if the users aren't happy with the performance, and so we have to go buy more infrastructure to enable that user experience. So these are all three different groups that we have to make happy. But it can be a fairly significant challenge and risk. Cost and complexity is the #1 challenge that we see with VDI, because it's very expensive to buy all of the pieces to put VDI in place, regardless of what virtualization platform you're on. And it's not just the cost of the licensing in the server, but really it's the storage and the networking infrastructure that can become very expensive. Now beyond that, we talked about user experience. It's a challenge to deliver that user experience that's better than or equal to a PC, especially when we start thinking about it from the perspective of the user rather than our perspective as IT professionals. Now, one of the other challenges that we run into are many deployment risks. These risks can completely derail a project. Things that we talked about earlier, things like sizing, things like hidden costs. These particular risks can very easily eliminate all of the savings that were planned in OpEx and actually make VDI much more expensive to deliver than a physical PC. Another challenge or risk is managing VDI at scale. We see that in many customers, they're able to get to 300, 400, 500 users fairly easily. But crossing that gap from 500 users to 1,000, or from 1,000 to 5,000, or 5,000 to 20,000 can be extremely difficult, because the skills that you need, and more than that, the infrastructure that you need to deliver VDI at that scale can be massive and very difficult to manage. Now, the last one that we'll talk about is this challenge of high availability and rapid recovery from disaster. Again, remember, that's one of the things that we sold the CIO or the CFO on when we were talking earlier about a VDI project, that we're going to improve the SLA, particularly around availability and disaster recovery for the desktop. So how can we deliver this, but how can we do it in a cost-effective way? Now, when we look at why many of these VDI projects have failed, there's some interesting comments that have come out of the Gartner group. From a recent paper, they said the #1 challenge associated with any SHVD or server-hosted virtual desktop, which is VDI, project is the lack of storage planning, resulting in higher than expected storage costs. So again, remember those challenges and risks. The #1 challenge is the cost, the expense of delivering VDI. But Gartner, as they point out, most of that cost is buried in storage. In fact, according to their paper, they said that storage represents 40 to 60% of the budget. And just that number alone is a barrier to entry for many users, or for many organizations. They just can't afford to deliver enough storage to meet the needs of a VDI project. If we look at the figures from that paper, and the paper was attacking the high cost of desktop virtualization from July of 2013, if you'd like to review that. But what they found was that the cost of storage dwarfed the cost of any other component, whether that was licensing, the actual end user endpoint, or even the server infrastructure. Storage could be as high as $1,000 a desktop, even on average, and then depending on the type of performance you wanted to deliver, could be even more expensive. The challenge here that was noted in the Gartner paper is that cost has to be balanced with user experience. One of the reasons that a lot of persistent VDI projects fail in particular is that when we finally get the bill of materials together for the VDI project and we realize how much the storage is going to cost, we start looking for ways to pare down the budget. Now, naturally, if you're going to reduce the budget, you're going to look at the big ticket items first. There's very little money that we can carve out of things like server infrastructure or licensing. Those are very tangible fixed costs. But what we see happening is many organizations will look at that huge number, the storage budget, and they'll start to erode away at that storage budget. Now, the problem with this is that as you reduce the budget, as you reduce storage from the design, you're also reducing performance. And so that user experience that we were targeting, that better than physical or at least as good as physical user experience, starts to become unattainable based on the amount of storage that we're purchasing. And that's why Gartner says that cost has to be balanced with user experience. Because if we put cost ahead of user experience, the project will fail. We'll never get past user acceptance. Well, what does Atlantis ILIO software do to resolve these issues? Well, one, we can completely change the cost dynamic of VDI and make it lower than a physical PC, but at the same time make it faster than a PC. So it's one of these rare solutions where the cheapest way to do it is actually the better way to do it from a performance point of view. Now, while we're doing that, we can lower deployment risk and improve things with automation so that a lot of those hidden costs, hidden risks are eliminated. As mentioned earlier, we've been proven to be very easy to manage at scale, even at the scale of 100,000 desktops or more. And because of the lower cost, and because we're doing this with really primarily software, it makes it much easier, more cost-effective for you to deliver availability and to deliver disaster recovery. When we look at some of these individual components, let's take a look at cost per desktop as a challenge first. With cost per desktop, with traditional persistent VDI, we see that the cost per desktop is usually somewhere around $1,000 to $2,000 to equal PC performance. Now this is again extremely expensive, and when we're looking at a total cost of ownership for the environment, it can price us right out of the market when we're comparing it with a physical PC. When we look at Atlantis ILIO though, we can actually cut the CapEx and OpEx by up to 80%, so that it's not only faster than a PC, but it's cheaper than a PC. If you look at this particular use case, this was for 1,000 users to deliver a desktop with 30 IOPS, which is really for a knowledge worker about as low as you should honestly go to give them a decent level of performance. The CapEx and OpEx over the course of 4 years was going to be $1,346. To deliver the same thing with Atlantis ILIO is going to be $497, or a 63% reduction. But the interesting thing is that if you notice, we're going from 30 IOPS per user to up to 5,000 IOPS per user. So we're giving them a user experience that's like MacBook Air, like dedicated SSD performance, but we're doing it with a 70% reduction in storage costs. In this 1,000 user example, that translates into $800,000 in storage savings, or cutting a huge amount out of the biggest line item in the VDI budget. And it gets our cost per desktop, the CapEx cost, down under $300 per desktop. Now let's look at the user experience. Again, as we said, 30 IOPS is about the bottom end that you would want to look at for a VDI session. Now the reason for that is when we think about a PC has anywhere from 80 to 150, even with a traditional spinning disk. If it has SSD, then you're going to have between 3,000 and 5,000 IOPS. So if we want to deliver that kind of performance, we have to deliver more IOPS, or IOs per second. Atlantis ILIO is able to do that. What that translates into for VDI is desktops that will boot in 2 minutes versus, or in a traditional persistent VDI model, running on Atlantis ILIO, the same desktop we can boot in about 12 seconds. So operationally, you get huge benefits there because problems like boot storms become no problem at all. Now let's talk about the actual user experience, because most users are not going to be sitting there waiting on a VM to boot because it's going to be pre-booted in your VDI environment. But what they will notice is actual productivity application performance and performance of the operating system. With traditional VDI, an application in the Office suite will launch in around 5 seconds. On Atlantis ILIO Persistent VDI, because of the massive amount of IOPS that we're delivering to the desktop, those desktop apps launch instantly. More than that, some of the features that would normally be disabled in Windows, things like search, can be not only enabled, but the responses are instant. So now we're talking about not just giving them a better VDI experience, but we're giving them a better than physical PC experience, delivering that SSD kind of performance, but we're doing it in a VDI model with all of the operational benefits that come with it, all of the desktop mobility, enabling bring your own desktop, but we're giving them that great user experience and enabling all of the great features that are built into the operating system. Now let's talk a moment about flexibility. When we're delivering traditional persistent VDI, in the design phase, we'll make some choices, and those choices will follow us throughout the entire VDI project. As an example, we may have to deploy on Tier 1 SAN for performance and capacity, and lots of fiber channel switches. It's difficult to integrate components between storage vendors many times, and sometimes even within a storage vendor, within their own family of products, it can be difficult to create interoperability. So you're very limited in some of the options that you have once you've settled on a design. When we look at Atlantis ILIO, because we're software, we can use all kinds of storage platforms and make that transparent to your VDI environment. We can use RAM as primary storage. We can use local flash, or we can use SAN or NAS, or we can use any combination of that. So as you build your VDI environment and grow it organically, you're able to make the most cost-effective choices for those particular storage platforms that are being optimized by the Atlantis ILIO software. Deployment time is another real challenge for VDI. Deployment time for VDI is typically 6 months to years for persistent VDI. And there's a good reason for that. Gartner says IT organizations have to carefully plan and size the storage infrastructure to avoid deployment failures. And because what that means is that we have this almost endless cycle of user acceptance testing. We'll build the VDI platform and put 100 users on it and then give it months to test. And then we'll put 400 users on it and we'll give it months to test. And then we'll put 1,000 users on it and take months to test. What happens is, before we get a design that we figure out actually works, we'll end up with many, many months and even years wasted in just validating performance and storage sizing. When we compare that with what we can do with Atlantis ILIO, because we're using servers, CPU and RAM, and basically turning that into storage performance, we can deliver the amount of performance that you need in a very fast and cost-effective way. So you can go live in weeks and with automated deployment tools as well, rather than months or even years. To prove that, one of our customers, the BLP law firm in the UK, actually called us, and within 2 weeks of contacting us, we deployed 1,400 virtual desktops. So they went from 0 to 1,400 virtual desktops deployed on our software, optimized, delivering great performance, and delivered with all of our automation tools in just 2 weeks. So again, this is a huge savings, because remember, most of the value that you're looking at from the CFO's point of view for VDI is operational. So the faster we can get deployed, the faster we can get all of our users on the platform, the more quickly we can start to recognize those operational savings. And as we drag the project out, those operational savings evaporate. So being able to go live more quickly is a huge benefit to the CFO and the CIO. Now, some of the other risks that come along with traditional VDI deployments are storage sizing. Storage sizing can be a huge headache, and because of this, it's almost a black art in the industry, VDI storage sizing. With Atlantis ILIO, we're simplifying the architecture because we're taking up to 80% or more of the storage out of the equation, which means that you can deploy with a lot less risk and with a lot more simple architectures. Persistent desktops mean you need more storage than you normally would. More storage means that you have to size it correctly, and you're sizing a much larger amount of storage, which is more difficult. Storage is hard to architect at scale, and so we're taking the most expensive component. It's also the most difficult to architect at scale, and we're creating a huge risk exposure for us in these VDI environments. Now, it's more than just the storage itself. Think about also all of the storage network infrastructure behind it. That means that even if my storage is sized properly, I also have to make sure that my storage network is sized properly. Otherwise, I'm going to have network bottlenecks. Now, all of this infrastructure becomes very difficult to manage at scale. So I've created kind of a monster with some of these big traditional VDI persistent deployments. Now, the other thing is disaster recovery. Remember, again, that's one of those features that we sold the CFO or the CIO on, you know, the ability to improve the SLAs for the desktop and deliver disaster recovery. That requires we duplicate everything, which is extremely expensive when we're doing it on traditional VDI storage, setting up disaster recovery sites with redundant arrays and replication between them. Extremely expensive to duplicate that infrastructure. With Atlantis ILIO, we can simplify the architecture and remove the overwhelming majority of not only the storage, but the complexity, the potential bottlenecks, the potential risk that is associated with sizing storage in that quantity. And also we can do disaster recovery with just servers and software, which makes it much easier to manage your DR site, and it makes it much less expensive because you're not having to create tons of redundant equipment. Now the impact of this, when we start to look at how the technology actually delivers performance, in this particular test, we did 97% storage consolidation. So getting rid of a huge amount of capacity. We also improved density and scalability of the environment. This was a blade infrastructure. We got 125 desktops per blade, and on storage we got 33 times more desktops per disk. So we're getting far better value out of the investment that's already been made in storage by increasing the density of users on storage. And at the same time, we're delivering better than physical PC user experience. According to Passmark, it was 5 times faster. This was 297 IOPS per desktop at peak. Again, the ability to burst much higher than that, up to 4,000 to 5,000 times, or 4,000 to 5,000 IOPS, is capable in this solution. So when we start to kind of net out all of the benefits, we see that traditional VDI is expensive. It's slow when we deliver it on traditional storage. It's expensive when we deliver it on flash. We have limited options when it comes to designing the network and the storage. The deployment time is extremely long, which erodes all of the OpEx savings that we were trying to accomplish. And we have all of the risk that comes along with it. It's difficult to scale, and it's difficult to size. When we compare that with Atlantis ILIO's persistent VDI, it's cheaper, it's faster, and you can deploy it in an extremely flexible way with any kind of storage, whether that's SAN, NAS, local flash, direct attached storage, or even using server RAM as primary storage. Because of this flexibility and the automation tools that we have, you can go live in weeks. So this and the automation tools that we have also eliminates a lot of the risks that you have. It cuts out the human element in sizing the storage and gives you simpler architectures that are easier to provide high SLAs with. A couple of customers that we'll talk about briefly. One is the Army Medical Command. They have 7 hospitals across the U.S. and Germany with 8,800 doctors and nurses. They were really looking to boost VDI performance so that their doctors and nurses could spend more time with patients and less time logging in, waiting on applications to launch. So the primary use case was these clinical applications, and storage was an enormous bottleneck. Along with that bottleneck, what we were able to do with the Atlantis ILIO software is to reduce by 85% the storage footprint, which means faster response time, more time with patients. So they're able to achieve the business benefits they were looking for, and they're able to achieve them in a way that that really cut the cost of the environment, rather than throwing flash at the problem or throwing much more spinning disk, which would have been a far more expensive way to deploy it. What they said was that in our proof of concept and testing, Atlantis ILIO offloaded 80% of the IOPS. So we were able to actually process 80% of the total storage traffic right there in the hypervisor using our software optimization. And we also reduced the capacity on disk by 85%. So we see reduction in the storage footprint and also reduction in the storage performance requirement while still delivering a great user experience. Now another user that we saw was Washington Trust Bank. Washington Trust was a VMware environment, VMware View. They had storage that was sized for 500 users, but the deployment stalled at 90 users because during peak usage they had huge I/O bottlenecks. And this is very common that we'll find when we see environments that have been sized for averages. Everything is okay until we get to a point where we're at peak usage. And then things are no longer okay because we start to hit the I/O bottlenecks, whether that's in the storage array or in the storage network. What they were able to do was deploy not only those 500 users, but to get 5 times the number of users on that EMC storage with an 875% increase in IOPS available to the desktop. This was an 84% storage capacity reduction. So again, we see we're eliminating large amounts of storage from the environment in capacity. We're providing more performance and getting better density on disk. So changing all of the dynamics around VDI costing. What Christopher Green, who's the IT infrastructure VP at the bank, said was that their SAN was pegged at 100% in the storage processors during those times of reported slowness. So they thought they had plenty of horsepower, but naturally they didn't. After they deployed the Atlantis ILIO software, IOPS on the SAN were reduced from about 3,500 IOPS to 350. So what that means is that Atlantis ILIO software is in the hypervisor, working in your VDI session host and processing tons of the I/O right there locally before it ever goes to SAN. And they saw basically a 90% reduction from what was being delivered or driven from the SAN previous to deployment with Atlantis ILIO and what was required after they deployed with Atlantis ILIO. So the net of it is to you can do more with the storage that you've already got by using this software to optimize it. Hawaii Medical Service, which is a part of the Blue Cross Blue Shield network, had a very similar environment. They had purchased, or not similar environment, but similar problems. They had purchased Fusion I/O cards to deliver the performance for their end users, but that came at a very high cost per user. So they had, as the bank did, a VMware View environment, but because they had bought the performance necessary, the costs were extremely high. And they were also only getting about 30 users per card. By using the Atlantis ILIO software, they were able to increase density from 30 users to 200 users per Fusion I/O card. So get much better value out of that investment and reduce the total cost per desktop from $1,800 a user to $400 a user. They saw a 95% consolidation ratio in their desktops. So they were able to really reduce the footprint that was required for each desktop. What HMSA said was that before Atlantis, only 30 desktops per Fusion I/O card. Afterwards, 200 virtual desktops. It makes the math very easy to figure out what the return on investment is there. So why is Atlantis ILIO software unique? Well, for a few reasons. It delivers the lowest cost per desktop. It's faster than a PC. It's the only solution for VDI and XenApp that can be deployed with no storage, using RAM as primary storage so that you can deploy VDI or XenApp with just servers and software. You can get 4 to 10 times more users on any shared storage or SSD flash device. So on those devices, your cost per desktop drops dramatically by implementing the Atlantis ILIO software. And some of the scariest problems, the risks, the potential for human error, both in the sizing and the deployment of storage, are eliminated because we're reducing the storage footprint, because we're bringing in automation and management tools, and because we're simplifying the overall architecture. Now, we've spent a lot of time today talking about persistent desktops, but naturally the same technology can be leveraged for stateless desktops, which means that if Atlantis ILIO is the standard by which you're optimizing all of your storage, you can go from stateless or persistent to stateless desktops without changing the infrastructure, using the same software to deliver both environments. And it's, again, all done with software, the Atlantis ILIO product. So to sum up, Atlantis Computing is leading the industry in VDI. We are the recognized experts in VDI, It's been proven at scale in the largest desktop virtualization deployment in the world. We cut costs. Every year we save customers millions of dollars in CapEx and operating costs for their VDI environments and their XenApp server environments. This is award-winning software, multiple awards not only in 2012 but also in 2013 by some of the biggest industry players that have provided this recognition. Atlantis Computing is the trusted virtualization expert. And so we're here to partner with you to make sure that your VDI deployment is successful. And trust me, we are laser focused on customer satisfaction and making sure that all of our customers have that great user experience that they're looking for in VDI, but also are able to deliver it at an extremely low cost. So that was what I had this morning. I very much appreciate your attention. We've got time for some questions, and so let's go ahead and open up the floor for some questions.
Thank you, Josh. Our first question today is, how are virtual systems becoming more intelligent when it comes to controlling data and distributing?
That's a great question. So virtual systems are getting more intelligent in a couple of different respects. Because of the cost of storage and virtualization, a lot of users and administrators are moving to environments where they have they're trying to get more storage into the server. They're looking at more server-based storage options rather than the traditional silos of SAN, of NAS, and of flash. So because of this, we're seeing that there's a real push in the industry to provide optimization there. Some of that is happening by third-party companies such as ourselves with our not only our Atlantis ILIO product, but also our recently released USX product for general server workloads. Some of that's also coming from the virtualization vendors themselves. We see great products like VMware vSAN that are there to optimize some of the storage components that are there on the individual host so that you can, again, do more with what you've already got, leverage localized resources even for enterprise applications. And I think as we move forward, we'll see more and more of that in the industry, more of those technologies that will optimize localized resources being delivered, whether that's through third parties or through the primary VDI vendors such as Citrix, VMware, and Microsoft.
Great answer. And our second and last question for today is, can you give 3 of your best practices around VDI optimization and delivery?
Absolutely. So we'll give you some quick best practices. One of them is going to be select a platform for VDI that makes sense for your organization. There's a lot of discussion about persistent VDI versus non-persistent VDI, what makes the most sense. Don't try and shoehorn a square peg into a round hole. If your infrastructure or your use case, your user environment is really built for a persistent desktop, then deploy persistent desktops and don't spend time trying to get to stateless, if you can avoid it, because it is a very costly route to go with all of the image rationalization and process changes that come with it. So don't feel like you have to do something unnatural to get to someone's ideal of VDI. VDI is something that's very complex, but it can be built in a lot of different ways. So look to build it in a way that fits your organization. And because it is so complex, get help from a partner. Resellers and integrators can be great sources of expertise, as well as Atlantis Computing. We're naturally here to help our customers as well. So that's one best practice. What I would also recommend is benchmark your system so that you know exactly what you're working with. There's some great tools that are out there, things like Login VSI, things like IOmeter, things like HDTune, but they'll tell you what kind of performance you're actually getting out of your infrastructure. And many times you might be surprised what's being delivered. One of the other things that I'll throw out there as a best practice is spend a lot of time on your image. Read as much as you can about image optimization for VDI, and put those practices into the image. Don't cut corners with that. Things like image disk alignment can be critical as far as guaranteeing the success of your project, and it can really change the performance dramatically. So give a lot of attention to the image. And that's where your benchmarking comes in handy too, because if there are problems in the image, the benchmarking will show that, will expose those problems and vulnerabilities for your project. But those are just a few best practices I'd throw out there.
Thank you, Josh. That was all the time we have for today. Again, you will be receiving a follow-up email with a link to today's recording. Thank you for all of the attendees for making time today and for your questions. We hope to see you at our next